Well, good morning and or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back. Today is Wednesday, May the 3rd, 2023. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I have been your host in this series of our live webcast programming by Deloitte for the last 3 years now. And as many of you know, we are using this particular channel to trigger conversations with technology leaders shaping the future of Canada, where I have had a pleasure of welcoming some of Canada's most senior and exciting and interesting characters. But we are also using this channel to bring to you topics that we know are timely and relevant. And boy, do we have a topic to discuss today. I'm really thrilled that today we are going to be unpacking the topic of Digital Transfromations Payday. As a matter of fact, this is going to be not only an international conversation, it'll be an intercontinental conversation. As I'm welcoming my colleagues, Tim Bottke, Tim Smith, and Diana, who are going to unpack this very, very critical, important topic for us. So, as I mentioned, today is going to be all about digital transformation, how to understand what creates value, and how to appreciate what might be eroding value as you think about your digital transformation. So it'll be a very relevant, exciting conversation for sure. We are planning an hour-long session today, and we are going to make sure to leave time for your questions. So if you would like to engage and ask your questions, this is a live show. Please use the Q&A feature of our Zoom platform to submit your questions to our guests. And now I'd like to very briefly introduce our distinguished panel. I am Dalibor, as I mentioned. I lead Deloitte Canada's Tech Executive Programming Services. And today I'm thrilled to welcome Tim Smith. Tim Smith is a partner principal at Deloitte US, and he is joining us from Chicago today. Tim Smith leads Deloitte Tech Strategy and Business Transformation Practice. Dr. Bottke is the keynote feature of today's session, as Tim Bottke actually just recently finished his doctoral dissertation on the topic of Digital Transfromations Payday, which was also then published as a book by Wiley, we're going to mention earlier. And last, but certainly not least, Diana, who is our global research leader within Deloitte's Center for Integrated Research, and joining us from New York. So we've got, Alberta, New York, Chicago, and Munich represented. Thank you very much for your time. Tim Bottke, over to you.
Yes, Dalibor, thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm really thrilled to be here in this group, and really looking forward to all the questions you might have. So what we're trying to do in the short time we have, because we could talk for hours about the topic, but in the short time we have, we try to do a few things. So first, we want to introduce the concept of value drivers for digital transformation, and not just in the typical sense hypothetical drivers, but based on hard data. I will explain in a minute how this was done. And then the most important topic, I guess, for all of us in these geopolitical crises, inflation times, whether what we are doing in digital actually has any link, any provable link to the value we create, and not in terms of a small Excel sheet proving whatever ROI, but in market value created for the companies where digital transformation is done. And then based on the combination of these things, we will also, and Tim Smith and Diana will dig deeper into these topics, deeper into the drivers, and then also propose some actions of what can be done based on the data to make sure that the value created is actually yours and not someone else's only. And as Dalibor said, Q&A, that's what we're here for. We are excited to hear questions and not only talk, not only making it a lecture, but really having your points and questions in the discussion. That's what we really look forward to. So let's start with a big number. And I think big numbers are always something worth starting with, because the big question is, does digital transformation really pay off?
Yeah.
And that's a big question. You've heard all the research and all these quotes saying 70% of digital transformations fail, which is a more or less random number, but it suggests what we all should be afraid of, that it's not a sure bet. It's a portfolio game. So it's really important to know what can happen if you do the right things and what can happen if you go and take the wrong route. And that's what we have looked into our research. And the good news is, based on the Fortune 500, our data set is much bigger, but the Fortune 500, just for this number, if everyone was doing the things the way they should be done, there is really substantial value upside to be generated by the companies. 1.25 trillion sounds like an immense number, but it's just for the Fortune 500. But the downside of the story, and that's a sure thing for every average value creation statement you can make, it's not everyone winning. The average is driven by the winners getting the average up and the losers getting it down. So if you do things the wrong way, value erosion will happen. So if you take the actions we will talk more about in a few minutes in the wrong combination, it's more likely that you will actually destroy value with digital transformation, which makes this whole thing a career-changing exercise, as we all know. But we all also know that the times where you could just sit and wait and not transform while everyone else is, these times are over. So what are the right actions and how did we get to them? The basis, and that's what Dali already mentioned, the basis for the research is a 4-year research exercise, which looked into all thousands of different companies in more than 20,000 reports, and the numbers which we'll later show even put additional analysis on top of that. Diana and Tim will explain. And all this ended up in this book, which is the research baseline. We are happy to say that the book was appreciated by the market. The Wall Street Journal bestseller list is one sign of that, but more important is, I guess, all the very interesting discussions we have. Yeah. Challenging, and I love this when they're challenging, and I'm looking forward to that, because it's all about how end-to-end boost the value of digital transformations, and not in the empty buzzword sense. Transform, disrupt yourself before you're being disrupted, being future ready, and so on. We know all these terms. No, it's all about quantitative-driven, analysis-driven insights, which can make your life and your company's performance change or not, depending in which direction you decide to go. So how did we?
This is what I think what you just said is very important. I think it is important for us to move from buzzwords and myths and these statements that everybody using. And this is why I appreciate it about your book. And by the way, there it is. And there is an audio version available too. It is based on actual evidence-based, factual, indisputable research. I understand like there was like thousands of companies surveyed. Yes. Over 4 years. And this is what I love about it. So thank you very much for that. Back to you.
Thank you so much. So how did we do this? If we go to the next page, it's very simple. And all the research we're going to explain today is based on that. So we gathered more than 4,000 companies. We looked into their 10K filings. So digging deeper into what they do and what they say about how they digitally transform. We did a lot of statistics stuff, which I don't want to bore now anyone with. So in the end, it's more than 3 million pages of data, almost 20,000 statements. And it's all about what do these companies do? And we used natural language processing and some advanced machine learning to do that. But in the end, it was just about replacing the understanding of what these companies do with machine learning and all these things to find out how can we judge what they have done and how can we link that to their financial performance. Very simple idea. We looked for 3 types of actions. What kind of strategy do they have? Digital strategy is, and we all know that's very important, is their investment plan, their technology investment plan aligned to the strategy behind, not the digital strategy, but the overall strategy. And then the soft factor of transformation, which I'm sure many of us here in the call are aware of, often becomes a problem. How is the change component tackled? And we were looking for these statements and we were trying to understand what companies do. and what happens if they do these things in what combination with their value and their financials. And then we did their variances by industry, geographic variances. We looked into all this, but whatever we did, in the end, a few themes always came up, and that's something Tim and Diana will talk about in 2 minutes. Just another technicality, how was this done? I was talking about, and you see that on the next page, I was talking about the actions, digital strategy, action 1, tech aligned to strategy, action 2, digital change aligned, change capability. And we did that by putting and looking for different terms in the statements. I'm not going to read all the terms now, but we tested it again and again. It had a lot of human check marks for the process. And we are now very confident that we mostly gathered what these firms do correctly. And it's fun discussion sometimes when you talk to clients who have been analyzed, when you are in the discussions, and we know from what they've said quite well what they have done. And that's always fun to discuss then and see how that links to value. So remember, digital strategy, tech aligned to strategy, and digital change capability. These are the 3 actions we look for. Mm-hmm. What does it mean? Next page. It more or less means we apply this dictionary, and then we come to what is interesting in most. And then every single of the millions of pages is scanned by the machine. There's a lot of talk about ChatGPT and similar these days. It's not so much different. It's the machine learning based algorithms looking and reading all these files and understanding, helping us understand what no human could do in this short time frame. And then picking up and counting what people do, so that we can actually judge whether, when they are doing it, and the mode of how they tell what they are doing, how that is linking to their financials. So the question is, what's the outcome, Diana?
Thank you, Tim. And I think Tim's explanation of those 3 individual actions is what I'm really going to focus on. That, you know, each of these actions we correlated to market cap. So we looked at the 10Ks over a 10-year period and ran our financial model to understand, based on their actual financial statements, what type of market cap value these organizations saw gained or eroded. And this really brings us back to the beginning of the conversation as well, with those big numbers that Tim showed and shared at the beginning. And understanding how each of these 3 individual actions are found in terms of frequency among the organizations and what type of value they're seeing based on our analysis. So the first one I want to focus on is digital strategy. And again, digital strategy means organizations are focusing broadly on digital transformation. Their 10Ks showed that they were talking about digital transformation, digitization, and that they were talking about that digital idea in relation to their enterprise strategy, their desire to move into new markets or introduce new products or capabilities to change their operating model. And digital strategy defined in that way, we found was only present in 44% of the over 4,000 organizations that we analyzed as part of this research. So what does that mean? There's a lot of room for organizations to think more intentionally about how they're bringing together their digital initiatives with their digital strategies in order to be able to drive value. When we looked at this cluster of organizations that had a digital strategy present, those organizations were seeing a lift in market cap versus those organizations that didn't have a digital strategy present. So that's a great validator about the importance of having a digital strategy really as a baseline for any digital initiative, as a key place to start. We saw that the digital strategy cluster was also significantly important for lower market cap firms, those under 10 billion, that they were more susceptible to seeing higher positive market impacts if they had a digital strategy in place than the higher market cap firms of above 10 billion. So I think the takeaway here is that the fundamental baseline for any digital transformation initiative or digitization program is making sure that you have that digital strategy in place. And with only 44% of organizations intentionally showing through their filings that they have and are implementing a digital strategy, there's room for improvement in this area. The second action, which Tim spoke about, that was part of the analysis, is technology aligned to strategy. So different from digital strategy, the technology aligned to strategy idea are organizations that are talking specifically about investments in individual technologies, AI, cloud, cyber, the metaverse, IoT, blockchain, chat, GTP, that buzzword bingo that we talked about earlier. These are those individual technology investments that are in service of your strategy. So I'm investing in cloud and cloud native capabilities to advance my new product strategy. That's an example of technology aligned to strategy. And what we saw from our analysis was that when organizations are intentionally talking about how they plan to use a technology like cloud or AI to advance their business strategy, they're seeing double the market cap increase than organizations that just have that digital strategy in place, which I spoke about on the last slide. So double the market cap is a pretty significant value lift that you can be seeing when you have the right hygiene in place about bringing together the business strategy part of your organization and the technology function within your organization. So, you know, are your product and your business people, your CEO and your C-suite leadership on the business side tightly aligned with leaders who are thinking about investments in individual technologies? The more organizations can intentionally bring those functions together and communicate back to the market their strategy around doing that, the greater the market cap potential there is. And while 44% of organizations had that digital strategy in place, we see that only 34% of Fortune 5 companies show signs of being strategic about their technology investments in this way. So this is an area where there's a lot of value that's being left on the table in terms of market cap and growth potential that organizations can be thinking about as part of their digital strategy implementations and development. And then finally, that third action, which Tim spoke about, is digital change. So thinking broadly about digital transformation, digital initiatives, and terms in relation to skills, workforce transformation, organizational design, all of those types of ideas that are going to, for example, have an organization talking about how, you know, in order to be successful as part of our digital transformation, we need to invest in digital skills. That's an example of digital change in our analysis. And I think what perhaps is surprising, since we always hear organizations talking about the importance of digital change and change management as a successful lever that needs to be pulled for digital transformation, it is absolutely critical. But on its own, when not in service of a strategy or specific technology capability, digital change on its own, we found, is a value erosion risk. Our analysis, in fact, found that compared to the lift that you're seeing from digital strategy, that there's a 3 times market cap value erosion that organizations see when they're only focused on a digital change capability and upskilling their organization or focusing on change without linking it to something else. And so we believe that this occurs really for 2 reasons. One, that change for change's sake without purpose or any ties to that broader strategy is just insufficient. And the second is that there's really this high degree of uncertainty that this signals to the market when you're not able to make those linkages of what the intention is behind the change. And so maybe I will pause there to see, Dalibor, if you have any questions for me or for us. I see that there are some questions coming in from the chat before we move over to Tim for our next section.
So yes, there are a couple of questions. I wanted to ask you, Diana, this was a sort of global survey. Was there any Canadian perspectives? How do you see Canada comparing to other countries in its digital maturity and ability to achieve and create the value from the digital transformation?
Thanks, Dalibor. So 2 points on that. I think the first point is to be clear on this analysis, as Tim was explaining. This analysis is of SEC filings. So it's a global analysis of predominantly US, but as well as global firms. So in terms of global representation, it's using US GAAP accounting standards. So we do feel very confident that this data is reflective of US and global value frames. And there are Canadian firms that the large ones, you can think about who they would be, that would be required to file with the SEC, would be representative of this data set and these findings. In addition to that, we have done some global surveying specific to Canadian firms. And what we see from that data is very consistent with what we're seeing here from the 10K filings analysis. In particular, though, we see that the Canadian market is even further behind in terms of defining digital transformation, investing in digital transformation, and achieving value from digital transformation versus global firms as well as from US firms. So just to give a couple of examples of what we're seeing from some of our broader research, when we're thinking about, for example, that first point of defining what digital transformation and digital initiatives even are, overall, organizations tend to think of digital initiatives in 2 buckets: digitization and digital transformation. And predominantly, we see that global organizations know what more mature digital transformations look like. And Dalibor, with you on some of our previous sessions, we have a spectrum we often use to show the difference, which maybe we can share in the follow-up materials. But being to the right of that spectrum and really truly digitally transforming versus digitizing, globally, about 70+% of organizations define digital transformation in that more transformative way. In Canada, we see that there's about a 9 percentage point difference in defining what we would call digitization as digital transformation. So I think in the way that the Canadian market is thinking about digital initiatives, they're more likely to be thinking about what global organizations would call digitization of data and platforms. So I think that's the first point. In terms of investments, we also see that the Canadian market is investing less in that transformation versus digitization. And as you might expect, that maturity level leads to lower value realization. And so we see that the Canadian market is more likely to say that they're achieving only about 30% of their enterprise value from digital initiatives. They're about 12 percentage points more likely to say that they're under 30%. They're about 11 percentage points more likely than global organizations to say that 30% or more of their value is coming from digital transformation. So I think in summary, the Canadian market, this data is very relevant. And what we see here from a global perspective, Canada is perhaps even a little bit less mature than what we're seeing here and a little bit more behind in achieving the value.
One more thing, just sort of to level the playing field. There was a question: what is included in the digital strategy? How do you describe what a good digital strategy covers? Would you be able to address that? Also, how would you translate? I of course, I'm very well aware of the digitization and digital transformation spectrum, but I would love for you to maybe describe that for the audiences. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, maybe I'll share with the group. Tim, do you want to answer that based on maybe some of what you're seeing and the terms that we use to define what a good digital strategy looks like?
I think given the time, we can talk about this for a long time, but my feeling, and also from all the discussions I've had, is really as the question already suggests, that very often digital is misunderstood as a strategy by itself. And even worse, that tactics which involve digital are seen as a digital transformation. In reality, they are just, as Diana explained, digitization, because a strategy does have nothing to do with digital, from my perspective, as a starting point. You define a strategy to win in the marketplace. And if technology, in whatever form, we call whatever buzzword is behind, is helping you to win in that segment you've chosen, then it's a good technology to use. If not, it's not digital strategy, it's just buzzword bingo used in PowerPoint.
Yeah.
But Tim, over to you, because I think the big question is, now we've talked about the single levers, but reality shows there's never an isolated single lever in life.
Yeah.
Reality is a combination of all these things. So Tim, over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for the time, everyone. And I'll address two other questions here live before we jump in, and the rest hopefully will pop as we go through it. One came up about how up-to-date the information is. So for example, ChatGPT only goes to 2021. We looked back over 10 years worth of 10Ks. So we certainly had a more robust data set. We were focused less on the longitudinal changes and more about what it said regarding market cap evolution, but that was a 10-year look back. The other question about how this research applies to the public sector and do we have specific research related to governments, Diana alluded to some of this in her discussions. We were focused on who was listing within the Fortune 500 for 10Ks, but as I go through the next set of slides, we're pretty confident the themes hold up based off a lot of sectorization that we did. So with that as a backdrop, and please keep the questions coming, we wanted to talk about the so what if you piece all of this together. So Diana did a great job of decomposing the actions, the clusters, whatever you want to talk about in terms of labels that underpin digital transformation. But what really matters is that looking at them in one combined set, do we see outsized value or destruction? So if we go to the next slide, just to bring it all back, we love this phrase, transformers rejoice. So if you are taking on bold digital transformations, if you have on your desk digital transformations that you need to help shape or fund, whatever it may be, it does feel good by our research to have a digital transformation that is fully aligned, that is executing what we call the trifecta. And what do we mean by that? What we mean is that an enterprise that is very clear on their corporate ambitions and the digital strategy to realize those ambitions, that is then very clear about the technology bets they are making in line with that digital strategy, and then very clear as to how they're mobilizing the enterprise to not only get it going, the digital transformation, but to sustain it, not in terms of just the execution, but over time. Those are the trifectas. Those are the ones that really stand out in terms of the outsized value. Back to what Tim Bottke alluded to earlier, those are the ones that if everybody did it right within the Fortune 500, they create 1.25 trillion in upside value. What's important to understand on that though, and because of the nature of the correlation, not causation analysis and the statistics behind it, you know, we'd love to tell you everyone that's in a trifecta versus not, but that's less of the point. What's more important is the second pillar, and we alluded to it earlier. Most companies are not going to be able to execute the trifecta that we've seen. Only 34% of them, as an example, are really strategic about their technology investments. Hence, that's sort of the ceiling of the enterprises that we saw that can really even be able to execute this trifecta. But we also did another slice and said, let's look at enterprises via previous studies Deloitte has done that are really leading in the market in terms of how fast they're launching new products, in terms of how agile they are in the face of competitor moves, in terms of how evocative they are in statements to the public in terms of their returns and how they're going to sustain them. Basically, there's a separate index we call the Exponential Enterprise Index that looks at enterprises that are really seeing outsized performance. We actually looked at just that slice. And for sure, those that were outperforming that got this trifecta right are actually seeing a 12.5 times difference in their market cap potential versus those that were just normal performers executing trifecta. So really being nimble in the market, really being clear as to where you're going to win in that market, really being clear as to the intentionality of the all puts you in a great spot. But as we'll talk in the next slides, there's some risk to that if you don't execute all as one. So that's the upside. Let's talk about sort of the opposite, and then I'll bring it all together with a graph. But as Diana was talking about, the change capability is really the fulcrum or the nexus as to being successful on digital transformation. A lot of us had this instinctually, as Dalibor mentions, I lead the tech strategy practice in the US, and a lot of our discussions are these scale digital transformations and how to make them survive. And yes, we find that there is a desire to deprioritize all the change management aspects for these digital transformations, either due to budget, because they believe everybody's aligned to it, whatever it might be. So instinctually, we felt like, yes, change is going to be an important component to our research. It was a great hypothesis that we had. But I was very surprised to see how significant it was. So let me tell you a bit more as to why. So again, the trifecta is getting all three right. And we mentioned that just change on its own, if all you are talking about is just doing change, hey, I'm going to go change my entire business to be more agile. Hey, I'm going to be hiring in the latest digital skill sets, making statements like that, at least in 10Ks, but no through line as to exactly why you're doing it. It's better that you just didn't do it at all, at least looking at our value equation.
This is hugely important, because like we of course interact with clients, and I'm hearing this from clients every single day, right? Every day. We want to become more agile, more nimble. We're looking for top talent and so on and so forth. So what you're saying is that if that is all there is to it, you are likely going to reduce the value of your enterprise by following that, like, me too kind of, I will also, unless you are able to tie it specifically to a business objective and a business strategy and the business ambition, right? This is very, 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 very important for people to pause and think and understand.
Look, 100%. And look, there's a bunch of theories behind it. Again, as Tim Bottke alluded to, we are looking at 10Ks via NLP and machine learning, so we could do this at scale. So I wish we could just answer all of the nuances here, but I feel pretty good, and so do a host of us via experiences in the field, as to why this is so important. Number one is, again, a tendency, yes, there's buzzword chasing as pertains to tech, but there's also buzzword chasing in terms of what do you think you have to get right regarding talent or ways of working, right? And we've seen that happen more often than we would like, because again, there's nothing to back it up. The second is, if you think about change, it's not only the nature of the talent you have in your organization to be that much more digital. Those who have modern software engineering skill sets, for example, or those who might be more digitally attuned. Those who understand how to launch product, how to sell enterprise services more as products. Those who have a product management mindset. There's a host of things that are digital skill sets, but there's still the old-fashioned things that you have to get right on any large-scale transformation. And what is that? That's ultimately making sure that the case for change that you have up front and the incentive set for all of the leaders to make sure that will sustain throughout the transformation, that those incentives are set correctly and they will stand the test of time. So if you have everybody that's agreeing to take on a transformation now, but for whatever reason, they have higher priorities later on, right? They lose focus, or the enterprise loses focus. So getting the change element right across all these dimensions are super important. And again, if there is a lack of clarity from the enterprise as to whether all those are set up correctly, as Dalibor mentioned, maybe it's better not to take it on in and of itself. Now that's provocative, but that's how we see it. Adding more to that, So we talked about getting it all together correctly as a trifecta. We talked about just doing change on its own. Most interesting is actually the biggest pitfall is if you get the digital strategy correct, you've made the tech investments correctly, meaning you're very clear as to why you're betting on certain technology linked to your strategy, but then you have no mention of the change aspect. So if you have a vacuum as to how exactly you're going to mobilize the enterprise, that's actually the worst thing you can do. So if you get ahead of your skis and start a digital transformation and you start purchasing the technology and you start to bolt it all in and you weren't thoughtful as to why the enterprise is going to take it on, we found the ultimate downside, which is effectively, it's like a 9% swing from the base down, but ultimately destruction of value if all the Fortune 500 did it that way of about 1.5 trillion. So,
and the destruction of value there would be that step one in strategy, you said that organizations do develop compelling strategy aligned to the business objectives. That's effort. But then they go into making actual investments in buying and deploying software. This is where gigantic portion of the investment goes. Without mobilizing enterprise, that is that sort of erodes value, right? That component is the problem.
correct.
And just to chip in here, because there was one question: how do we control against other factors, stock repurchasing, etc.? And that's a very, very good question, because as we all know, the market cap in the end is the end result of a subjective view of the shareholders of what they see in the company, and they cannot look inside. They, in the ideal world, they can read and understand what has been published, but they have no inside knowledge. So we are using what is called the residual income valuation model, which is controlling for the factors mentioned here, like stock repurchases, etc. And everything what is done in the digital transformation part is then fitting into the subjective element of these valuation equations being used. So it's all subjective, and that also explains now, based on more and more experience which shareholders see, why they act in different ways and how they attribute value. And it seems like common sense. So if the right technology is there, if the right strategy is there, but if you miss to take your people along, it's all wasted.
Yeah.
That's something we always have seen, and it was in our gut feeling. But the data shows it's very true, and it's even more destructive than everyone thought, if you believe that.
Thanks, Tim. And just to layer in on what you're saying, even, less technical for people like me who are not finance wizards. And I think the idea there too is all things held equal. When we're looking at these factors compared with one another, it's the difference between doing the digital strategy, investing in the technologies and not changing, compared with just having a digital strategy or just having a technology strategy. So these shifts are comparing these three factors with one another and in combination as well. So that's where we're able to confidently say that for the pool of organizations that have that digital strategy and aligned investments but lack the change capability, they're seeing 10 times greater losses because we're able to compare it to the organizations that don't have that as well. So hopefully that helps.
10 times greater losses. Wow.
Yes, and that leads to the other question that I see here. Yes, obviously, what is being measured is the strategy which is communicated and not the real strategy, because if shareholders would knew the real strategy, and which would be different from the one being communicated, it would be called insider trading in some way or the other. But in an ideal world, and that's the second part of the question, you have to be intentional in what you do. And when you are intentional, you should also communicate what you do in the right way. Obviously, we cannot measure where there's a huge gap between what people say and what they do. But the good thing about the 10Ks and the SEC filings is we are pretty confident that other than in pure marketing presentations, executives would think a few times before they put in something into the 10Ks which they cannot deliver. it would be very different if you would go to, I don't know, conference speeches, etc., and would use what has been said in these.
Yeah. And Tim Smith, a couple of questions are coming
Sure.
that touch on the topic of, for example, lift and shift infrastructure into cloud. That would not be what we are discussing here when we talk about digital transformation. Maybe Tim Smith, if you could maybe set up those different categories and types of digitization to digital transformation, and what we mean when we say digital transformation as opposed to digitization.
Yeah, I can play it out, and I sent a link to everybody in the chat so you can see the spectrum behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, there's everyone has a different definition of what digital transformation is or is not, and that's fine. And everybody has a different view as to what digital transformation ultimately means to them, and that's fine. What we've been spending a lot of our time on in the research is to at least get a baseline definition of it, so we're all then arguing as to whether that makes sense or not. And a piece of that was what we call the spectrum. Ultimately, how we split it is the following. Either you are taking on some type of technology move to change your business, or you're taking on, and via changing your business, you're changing the channels that you're ultimately selling into, you're reaching new customers, you're building net new capabilities, you're greenfielding out a new business unit, or you're holding your capabilities fixed, you're holding your markets fixed, you're holding your customers fixed, but you're just trying to get better serving them. And better might be more cost efficient, better might be more efficient scale, whatever it may be. The spectrum shows sort of the differences between it. We like to say that level 0 and level 1, you're holding the same business model, you're holding the same capabilities, but whether a little bit or radically, you're going in all in on technology just to change the way you're working internally. Right. So I saw in the chat, there's a question about, lift and shift to cloud. Generally, lift and shift to cloud would fall more into what we would call like a level 0 or a level 1, what we call digitization. However, and then what we would say level 2 plus is more digital transformation because you're changing your business model, you're changing your capabilities. However, I'm sure there's arguments out there in which you are doing this shift to cloud because that's the only way you're going to be able to reach new customers, because they're expecting a velocity of product releases that you just couldn't do with your antiquated technology estate. Right? So the answer is it depends. If you believe you're doing that shift to cloud to turn on new markets, new products or business models, and you fall more on the right-hand side. If you're doing it for fixing the way that you operate internally, you're on the left-hand side, all are fine. The reason why we like this spectrum, though, is one, it's a way to start and say, this is what we're really trying to do. But then two, to really measure whether your ambitions align with the reality of what you're trying to take on. If, for example, you are putting in, a new platform that's going to make it such that you have less manual reconciliations as to how between processes, fine. Do you really want to go around and tell everybody you're doing a bold digital transformation? Probably not. And the way you think of funding, the way you think of measuring the value will be different, the way you think of setting incentives. But if this is ultimately something that's going to allow you to hold on and grab new customers, it takes that much higher importance, that much higher in terms of materiality to your balance sheet, and that much higher in terms of what you got to get right in terms of the enterprise behind it. So Dalibor, to your point, that's how we think about it and dimensionalize accordingly.
This is beautiful insight, and I think that many of our audience members can, I think, place themselves and their organizations along this, 5 different types. That really helps, I think not only the role of the CEO, which was at the top of your slide, but also executive sponsorship, business involvement. Everything should be driven by what kind of transformation are you actually embarking on, or is it really a digitization, as you call it? Thank you for that, and thank you, Dana, for popping up. I'm going to make sure that following this call, we provide the materials to those who have registered, and of course, would absolutely invite you to reach to us. You now know the way to find us if you'd like to have further conversations on this topic. Let's carry on.
Okay, and yeah, let's bring it home with a little bit more leave behinds, and then we'll have plenty of time to go through the other questions or any other ones that emerge. So just as a summary, if you had to have sort of the cheat sheet as to everything we talked about. Let's go to the next slide, which is the best visual to think about how it comes together. So the trifecta: digital change, digital strategy, tech-aligned strategy, getting them all together is the most positive combination. And if everybody did it right, or even for an individual enterprise, you're talking about a 5% market cap lift. Yes, at least via what we saw in the 10Ks, if you're going to state anything about what you're doing for digital transformation, be bold on it, being very clear as to what the technologies are that you're embracing and why, leads to at least differentiation in terms of those who don't mention it vis-a-vis market cap. Same thing, but less so with digital strategy. Again, being clear that you're using the promise of digital to enter new markets, new channels, etc., but not mentioning the tech with it, not mentioning the change. Yes, right. There's a positive return, but it's starting to get dangerous because, again, it's an indicator that maybe the enterprise isn't there behind you on all of it. We talked about digital change capability by itself is a value destroyer. Change for change's sake is not what we would recommend. And then last but not least, leaving out the change, but being very intentional on the other two is the worst spot to be in, with a risk as much of 9% market cap erosion. Tim, Diane, and I joke about this all the time, that we would love to be on this call saying, hey, if you put $1 in this technology with this form strategy, we expect you to see X% returns. That's not what the research could do. That's just not what's in 10Ks. And if we could do it, it would be a very interesting conversation. And it's less about, in my view, the 1.25 and the 1.5. Yes, those are big numbers. What's more important is the swing in market cap and the differential. We're literally talking about an enterprise that, based off how well they do this, they're talking about a 14% swing in their market cap or the value they're going to get in this. And that's the biggest leave behind that we want to have, besides some so whats, as to how to think about digital transformations when you're shaping it, when they come across your desk, and what the consequences are of not getting it right. So if we go to slide 18, yeah, the trifecta for sure. So if we go to slide 18, more of the ways to, or the cheat sheet to look at digital transformations and a way to think about shaping them moving forward. This is expressing some of what's been there in the stats, but number one is being deliberate, being intentional. That intentionality matters. If you are deliberate as to why you're taking on digital transformation across all the vectors, you get the higher returns. I think we've drained that one. The second is communicating with purpose. I saw some aspects in the chat about ultimately having everyone understand why you are taking this on, why is it important, why you've set the right technology bets, not only for the market with, yes, those who are more confident in what they're doing, we've seen higher returns, but also internally, because that's what's going to make you feel good that the change aspects, the sustainment will hold. The third is you can't just ignore the technology and leave it to those within the CIO suite to get it done. You have to be conversant enough, you have to be knowledgeable enough to maybe not understand the bits and bytes associated with the given tech. You don't need to know large language model training data sets and how to get that done, but you need to understand the applicability to the capabilities you're trying to impact by your digital strategy. And so a modern executive is going to have to get deeper in the nature of technology than they have been before. And last but not least is the preparation. Go ahead, Doc.
So Tim, I was going to say, I'll linger a little bit on that third one. That was actually a message to business executives championing digital transformation, right? The onus on the business executive to not abdicate the need to understand technology that enables their business. They have to understand it and cannot just abdicate it and give it to the IT department to do, right? They have to be, that's I think a very important point that needs to be highlighted too.
Yes, and I've had many, Dali, boy, you know, I've had many discussions on executive level on exactly that point, and even, yeah, very heated discussions. Because for me, there are two worlds. Either the technologies we talk about, they're just strategically useless and they just help you to digitize, save some costs, and they're not really strategically relevant. That would be one good excuse for an executive not understanding what these technologies can do. But if in the other scenario, you would believe that within these technologies, or in the real world, mostly in a combination of different technologies to define something new, which can help you compete in the marketplace. If you're in that scenario, how would you, as an executive defining the strategy, how could you afford saying these tools I don't understand, let IT do it?
Yeah.
So either you're in the first scenario, if it's just about cleaning your legacy, probably it can be done with a simple IT program. If it's strategic, then it's by definition executive level responsibility.
There we go.
Yeah. And reciprocally, for those in the IT organization, it's understanding this critical business need, and really understanding who needs to be business translators. So, very often when we talk with CIOs or the tech organization and CFOs, one of the common questions that we get is, how do we understand which IT investments to fund or not to fund? And looking at it from both directions and translating, like Tim were saying, the business side needing to understand the technologies enough to understand the value, and IT and CIOs and technology leaders becoming much more effective business translators to meet in the middle.
As Patrick is submitting a comment saying this is really, a lot of this is about digital literacy that has to now be pervasive everywhere across the organization, right? Actually, from boards all the way down, right?
Yes.
So Tim Smith, I am acutely aware that I cut you off at the third of the four. So let's go back to the fourth.
All good. Yeah, no, I mean, then the last one is just the preparation involved, right? This is not something, of course, that this shouldn't be surprising to anyone, but so much of the digital transformation beyond figuring out what the strategy is about getting the enterprise ready for it. And so the preparation that you can get in front of it, or the very often fail fast reviews as to how attuned the organization or your tech bets are to the realities of what's going on at the enterprise, the better off you will be. So these are the big four as a takeaways, Dalibor. And I think we can start actually burning through some of the questions. Yeah, unless there's other
let's do that. So there was a question like this research, and I think we can just safely now kill the slides and just have our friendly faces on. This research obviously is focused on publicly traded companies, but I know Tim and Diana, of course, our practice works with public sector, private companies, and so forth. Is there any reason that you think of that this exact same thing would not apply to other, non-publicly traded companies?
Let me start. I think obviously we cannot prove it because there's no data, but I've had some discussions with non-traded companies on exactly the same issue. And I think the good news for these companies is that sometimes the patience of the shareholders might be a bit higher in terms of how long do they bear, how long. But on the other hand, the hurdle to start is often higher at the same time. But obviously the analysis based on publicly traded companies, it's based on the information asymmetries in between what the company is doing and what the market is seeing. And that's a bit different on the private side, but the recipes and the action, I strongly believe they are as valid or even more valid, because in privately owned companies, you often cannot also afford to experiment that much, depending on how deep your pockets are. I think it's easy to say we are now all agile, failing is learning. It's easily said if it's done with someone else's money. But if it's your own money, probably you have sometimes a bit of a different perspective on this.
Yeah,
that's very true.
I can layer in a bit too, just based on some of our other research we've done related to privately held companies, related to financial value from digital transformation. And I would just reinforce what Tim has said. Our broader global data shows that beyond this analysis, since it is only for publicly listed companies, that in terms of how they think about digital transformation, that privately held companies are thinking about digital transformation on that spectrum in a mature way. But they do see more value realization challenges and barriers than some of these other firms do. And so I think that where they have challenges are across things like having confidence in what the right measures are to be using for digital transformation, because they don't have that those same types of financial KPIs to be looking at. And so our broader research shows that privately held companies are actually less likely to use financial KPIs as their measure, because they wouldn't be using market cap. And so I think that one of the things that we do see is that private companies are investing in digital transformation in mature ways, in the same types of technologies that public companies are, that they are using financial measures, but they're different ones, obviously, and that they're more likely to augment those financial measures, therefore, with other important value measures. Because let's remember that value measuring value across an organization, there's not only financial value, there are other value measure areas that they need to measure too.
And especially if we think about public sector, then the value is very much non-financial driven. It's about the experience to citizens and so forth. But I think what you're saying is that what you just shared with us is actually a good proxy. There are variations, but the essential statements, the trifecta holds true. We have a couple of questions around the time horizons to actually create value and make that positive or negative impact to valuation. Any comments on like how long does it take? What is the value curve? Is it front-loaded, back-loaded? Any comments on that?
I can start, because I've spent some time also in the book on this. So number one is, all the research which has ever been done on tech value has proven that it's often latent. So message number one is, if you really embark on digital transformation, don't expect it to show up in your P&L quickly at scale. And if it does show up, it's probably in the other direction, not the one you would love to see. On the market cap side, which is always at a certain point in time, remember what we discussed, the fantasy and all the components behind which drive the market cap, it's instantaneous. So once the market believes that what you're embarking on and your strategy is in the right direction, it will be reflected in your market capitalization. The problem is, it will very likely be negatively reflected in your P&L.
Right.
And that's what many executives are afraid of. And that's also what the research in the book is showing. More likely, there will be a period of pain, which is also no surprise, because it's a transformation. It's not a little single project. So it will take time.
That's very good.
There was also a question on, is there optimal timing? And no. All I can say is, if the timing is driven by following a hype and not understanding that this is helping your strategy to win in the marketplace, then it's the wrong timing. That's what I've always seen. I think if you can formulate the right strategy why you do this, it can be early, it can be late, depending on how you see the market, then it's the right point in time. But you cannot calculate whether being a first or late mover is a good or bad thing. I've tried, it just doesn't work.
We are approaching our time. I just had one question that I think is broadly. What's the biggest digital transformation success story you have recently seen? And are there any standout achievements there from your perspective?
I'm usually not. Look, Dalibor, that's the question I'm usually not answering, because now the professor in me talking. I think every single research over decades where the 5 factors for a leading company and what you should follow, every single research which have been done, most of these companies do no longer exist.
Well, that's an interesting.
So I think the key message rather here is, let's not. I'm very much against this. Let's copy or let's follow some best practice. I'm a strategy person. So best practice is the death of strategy. You will just never differentiate. You can learn, and maybe you can learn on the digitization part from best performing companies, but you cannot learn strategy from someone else.
So this is a very good point. Thank you very much for that. So what we will close this on is, for the audience members, there are different flavors of digital transformations, starting from simple digitization. Don't confuse that with the actual enterprise redefinition and repositioning, which is a true digital transformation. Our research suggests trifecta of having a compelling digital strategy that aligns to the business's ambitions, purpose, and objectives, followed by deliberate and intentional investment in technology, and then enabled through an enterprise-wide management of change. Those are the three things that we see. When they align, magic happens. If they're misaligned, catastrophe could be the result. And that if you're just doing digital change, that erodes value. But it's even worse if you have a strategy and invest in technology without enterprise-wide digital change. That kind of is what I'm drawing out from this conversation, to summarize it. I would like to thank you, Tim's and Diana, very much for your time. We have recorded this session. We're going to share the recording link. If you have any questions or follow-ups, please, of course, let me know. We'll be happy to have conversations with you and your leadership teams on the importance of this. And just to remind everyone, next week, May 10th, we're going back to our conversations with tech leaders shaping the future of Canada. And I'll have a pleasure of hosting Sid Party, the Chief Information Officer for Manitoba Public Insurance. So please come and rejoin us. Thank you all. Thank you very much, Tim and Diana.
Thanks, Albert.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. Bye-bye.